Right. All right. It is 11 o'clock, and we are going to see if I can actually make share my screen work once in a while for purposes of these things. This is the first time, I guess, that everyone is recording things. So please be aware that if you do not wish to be heard or you do not consent to being recorded, don't speak up. It's very simple. It's a very simple process in that regard. Those of you who do speak, you're, of course, giving consent to be recorded. So there you go. Now that we got mandatory things out of the way, we are going to talk today about the fourth thing in my series. I'm writing memorable characters, creating believable and playable new races. And, why in the heck is this doing this? Okay, one moment, please, while I try and sort out this, because I always have issues. No. There we go. Share a screen. There we go. Let's see if it works. Who knows? We will try it and see if it works, and if it doesn't, so be it. All right. I can't see it that way. All right. Because if I go to the slideshow, it says that I can't see. Well, such is life.
Yeah, so you can get that with PowerPoint sometimes. So if you hit present mode, then I usually Alt Tab back to Discord and then share, then it works.
Okay. Where the heck is present mode?
So when you've got you're in presenter view now. So when you go into full screen, click that.
It then gives me a full screen. I can't see anyone if they chat. So
yeah. Then just do Alt Tab out of it. That's the way.
Oh, okay. Alt Tab out of it. That'll do it.
Yeah, and then you want to share again. So stop sharing and share it.
Okay. So then Alt Tab.
Yeah. So now yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And now it's come back to your screen. It's like jumping between.
Okay. Yeah. Forgot it.
Start again.
Screw it. I can't figure it out. But this is
now. Now we can't.
Yeah. No. I turned it off. So let's see. One more time. Try it one more time, and then if not, we'll just deal with it. It is something I've always struggled with, and I'm going to continue to struggle with as it goes. Do you guys see it or no?
Nope.
No.
Wait, now I see it.
Oh, you do? Oh, well, there you go. Well, I can't get it to work from the slideshow in PowerPoint, but here it is. So we'll make do. And it always is the issue. I just give up on this. But as we're in voice anyway, you're gonna get to hear my lovely, whiny, annoying voice go through some of this anyways. So, of course, we're entitled Writing Memorable Characters, Creating Believable Playable New Races. And I'm just going to throw it out there because we all see players who want to, present a new race. Why are COs, GMs reluctant to permit new races? I'm going to throw it out there, open to the crowd. We have the silence of nobody wants to talk because they don't want to be recorded. Is that it?
No. I was just wondering how to raise hands.
Yeah, just speak up. I've long given up on that sort of thing of raising hands too.
Fair enough. Let me grab my jacket real quick, and I will. And My question is actually pretty simple.
Now in the chat, I'm seeing
or
things.
my answer to your question, I should say. Because frankly, a lot of people are a lot less creative than they think they are.
That's not one I thought of. But I suppose that could be true.
And, dude, a new race could also be like a logistical nightmare too.
When you say logistical nightmare, what do you mean?
It could be like they could use this as an excuse out to create like an overpowered character or whatnot. So
that was my absolute number one reason that people don't do it, because it's got the potential for a Mary Sue. It can balance your sim. It can balance the game. Those are certainly definitive problems with a new race or species. What else? I actually came up with 6 reasons. So maybe you could come up with more. Anyone?
The sheer amount of reading that goes into trying to edit and improve, like get a new species ready to be approved for the setting.
So are you saying from the side of the simmer or the side of the GM?
GM, NTSC, new settings, technology elements is the thing we do. But the point being the amount of work that goes into the NTSC team.
Yeah, I mean, it does require a lot more effort. I mean, because not only do you have to know what you are playing, so do other people, and that's a real big problem, because maybe the new species doesn't have the detail that a CO wants, or maybe from the simmer side, it's like, well, why am I going to put in all this work and not have it approved? I mean, that's certainly a problem, but I'm thinking more on the CO side. But let's see. Okay, I see.
All right, I'm gonna shut up.
Okay, so
can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
All right. So, hi, I'm Wes. I'm the guy who's currently me and another member are currently reviewing Maddie's species character creation guide that's currently being submitted. Yeah. So yeah, we're on the other end of that.
You and I are going to fight about that phylogeny, by the way.
So well, I guess this is going to be a great seminar for you guys.
So because of the workload of that sort of thing, we've actually introduced a species that's just called random alien in our setting. And the point is that oftentimes you see these players show up with like kind of a species concept, but they don't really like the amount of detail to build an entire species.
Lack of detail. That's a huge one. Okay.
Yeah.
That's absolutely huge.
Because the amount of work that it's required is big. You think to make a fully fleshed out species, that people are going to like. So what we have is we have the option of just being a random alien, where you just say what they look like and if they have any sort of special features, and as long as they're not, disruptive somehow, then they could just be like any, like a rubber forehead alien from Star Trek. If you want them to look different and have like a different culture, then just
stop you, Wes.
Do that without making a new one. Go ahead.
Stop you, Wes. All right. So, again, it's why are we reluctant? So we don't need to go into an entire history about what's going on in Star Army at this moment. But the simple, the simple thing is with GMs and COs is that, at least from my perspective, there's a potential for the Mary Sue. There's COs that quite frankly are not willing to go outside of whatever canon is. What Wes was starting to hit on, there's simmers themselves try to create the species, but there's a lack of detail, or from another perspective, the characters, people are just trying to create something different, but they don't want to put in the work that's required. Could someone mute, please? Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries. Ultimately, for example, in other reasons, in that trying to be different, maybe there's not even a lack of difference from a canon race. I mean, it's just they're different to be different and not to actually create something new. But most of all is that, hey, these new species or races fail a reality test. And I think it's very important that when you're creating a new species, they have to be realistic. You have to figure out why this species is the way they are, not just, oh, they're telepathic and they got super strength and they got this and they got super hearing and they can smell radiation a mile away. No, we got to make things realistic, okay? And if you guys have stuck with me long enough on these, writing memorable character series, I'm a huge proponent of realism and making things make sense. So from my perspective, when you're creating a new species, I think that you have to look at, first of all, how did this species even evolve? Why are they the way they are? If they have, telepathy, why do they have telepathy? Why do they have, empathy? Why do they have whatever? Okay. So generally speaking, when we're looking at how the species evolved, we look at why did a species come up with these traits? For example, most traits, at least early in a creature's or species life, is dependent upon their survival, right? What traits are being evolved so that this species can become a dominant or survive in the world that they are in? This is called natural selection, okay? Those organisms with advantageous traits are going to survive and reproduce, and those survival of the fittest, and those who survive and reproduce, of course, are going to pass on those favorable traits to other of their species, whatever it may be. And those with a harmful trait are probably not going to reproduce. They're probably going to die, right? But depending on the environment that the character species, whatever comes from, is going to determine what's advantageous. For example, if you're in a world with light gravity, wings might be more advantageous than super strength, right? Because, if you're super strong, you may not be able to collect your prey, who are flying away from you. If you are in a world where it's a heavy gravity state, those wings aren't going to do you a lot of good because you're going to flop right down to the ground. You're not going to get much airborne. So there are things there that it matters where you came from and what happened. And then there's the question about, well, what about vestigial remnants, right? Things that may have been important at one point in time, but no longer are. Like, we humans have appendixes. What good are they nowadays? Mine's gone since law school, so 30 some years, I'm living just perfectly fine without it. It really doesn't have a purpose anymore in today's society. A tail for humans, for example. We don't really have that, but we still have occasionally a person that has someone that's born with a knob or something, that tail. And these are the remnants, right? They're going to pop up. So not every single thing in your species is actually going to be necessary. It may not even have a purpose anymore, but it might be there. But you got to think about these things. How are we evolving? So if you're current create a species, for example, with telepathy, why does that species have it? What would have been the necessity for having it? And if a species has telepathy, why would they have even developed speech? Because telepathy is certainly much more effective in order to communicate. It's thought to thought, right? Why would that develop? Well, perhaps, you had a communal society because it was where, the world at large was loud that they came from, or perhaps, they were the prey in a hostile territory and they used that as a means of communication. I don't know, but there's got to be a reason telepathy developed. Similarly, empathy. Was there a need for social cohesion? Was there a need for this species as they're evolving to have more of them, or have a reason for feeling what the other ones are feeling? I don't know. But again, it bears thought in terms of why these special abilities, as we would call them, are developing. So again, it really matters to identify your character's world. Where do they come from? What are they doing? Your environment is going to determine, character traits and limitations. For example, let's go to Andor. Okay. I'm sorry. And I'm going to hound on this. You'll probably hear me hound on this several times. Andorians, where TNG decided that there's 4 sexes to have kids, bullshit. There is no way on God's green earth that would ever occur. That species would die out, especially on a cold world, what Andor is, where resources are precious and lives are probably short. It's probably really a big, huge survival of the fittest. And we'll talk a bit more about Andorians later, because I play Andorians differently than most people. But I also created them in days when Andorians were, how shall we say, not very well known, and TNG hadn't done anything with them, and Enterprise didn't exist. So we'll talk a bit more about Andorians later. If your environment has many moons, what does that do to the tidal streams of the planet? The more moons, the more gravity, the more hostile the waves are. Are sea creatures going to really survive, or what would they look like in that kind of environment where the tides are changing rapidly? Or maybe the gravity wells are offset against one another and it's real smooth because of the where the moons are positioned. What does that do? It also matters, as I kind of alluded to before. Are you the dominant species? Or are you perhaps the less dominant species? Is your world homogenous? In Star Trek, we have a tendency to, say that all, worlds, they all look the same, right? I mean, despite humans, we have different colors. We have fat, skinny, short, tall, different hair, different, eyes, different whatever. We have all kinds of different things in humans, right? And frankly, if you go down into it even further, there were 6 or so different kinds of pre-humans out there, and only 1 or 2 actually survived, to be what we are today. So again, what is it that it looks like for your particular species? The one species in Star Trek that we do see differences, because all Andorians, of course, are all blue with an antenna, and they all wiggle and whatever not. All Vulcans all look the same. They're all the same colored. Well, until we had Tuvok. Tuvok was a different color. But all Klingons pretty much look the same. Although, TOS and TNG have different, flavors, obviously, but, and then they come create a rationale to deal with that. But the Xindi are the ones that actually have the most variation, right? Which seems much more realistic to me. I mean, but again, that's a world that maybe doesn't have one set of dominant species, have our own cooperation. And right now on this world, we humans are the dominant species, but we do have different variations of color, shade, skinny, fat, tall, short, etc., depending on where we come from. But even if you look at our world, theoretically speaking, if evolutionarily, we were all darker skin at one point, and then those of us who moved up north got lighter skin because we didn't need as much sun to we didn't have as much sun up north, so we didn't have to protect our skin as much, so we became white. And then the darker skinned folk, were still in the areas where there was a lot more sun, so they needed darker skin to melanin to protect them. So again, these are things to deal with. Another thing in the your character's world, right? Are they living in harmony, or are again species of predator, prey? And again, remember, if you're prey, you tend to live a shorter life, right? Because the predators are going to feast off you, and generally speaking, they're going to catch you. Prey doesn't live as long, so if you're the weaker species, your life is going to be shorter. And if you're stronger, you're going to tend to have a longer life. Let's go into more about the environment, because I never talk enough about environment and how it, it affects people. Alien life might not be carbon-based. And if it's not carbon-based, what is it? I mean, how do we even recognize it as life? And that's really kind of a great plot for any Star Trek, sim is, how do this, it's not a carbon-based life form. Maybe, it's a Horta. Okay. We didn't in TOS, we didn't originally recognize a Horta as life, right? Because the scanners couldn't predict it because it was not a carbon-based life form. It was a silicon-based life form, so obviously they are different. And so how are we, maybe we're killing off billions of pieces of life right now because, maybe rocks have some sort of thing that we don't know about. I don't know. But your imagination should not be limited to just carbon-based life. I mean, a world, for example, may be filled with methane, right? And we've seen species in Trek where, the people breathe methane. Well, what does that do in terms of, working on a Federation ship or a Federation starbase, etc.? Things that you have to think about, right? Planets with a higher gravity might force life to evolve shorter in stature. Why? Because gravity pulls down, right? So you're going to be shorter, you're going to be thicker, more compact bodies, while lower gravity, you're probably going to have tall, thin, maybe the wings, whatever. Water creatures, they're probably going to have gills or webbed limbs to account for their environment. Even in Earth's history, oxygen was not the primary gas for breathing. And, tree roots actually caused a 70% worldwide extinction in our history because they actually poisoned the air with oxygen. Okay. So there's, that just goes to show you that, we shouldn't just think, oxygen's the way to breathe, the way to be. Think about the star. If it's not a yellow star like we have in our sun, what will the colors look like to a person, someone from a species? Maybe you're on a red star, right? Maybe everything on the planet now looks red, orange, yellow, and you're probably not going to have a lot of blues, right? Because that's ultraviolet light and that's a shorter wavelength. So maybe the species can't even see those wavelengths, and or like a dog, they only could see in certain colors, and because of the way their rods and etc. are shaped. Maybe you can see more colors because maybe you're at a hotter star and the atmosphere scatters the light better. I don't know, but again, these are ways that a species is going to develop and what they determine what they can and cannot do. plants in such environments could be a wide range of different colors, such as red or yellow. Maybe that's how they, and so if they're going to grow, they're probably going to photosynthesize differently, right? So again, lots of things to think about, when you're creating species, and it goes down to, remember there was a episode in TNG where Deanna Troi was talking about how to translate things, things that we may call a certain thing, they may not. She held up a glass and said, what am I, and it was half full of water. What am I telling you? And, the response was, it's a glass. And it's like, well, how do you know I'm not telling you half full or water or, whatever? And those are communication problems that we should have with, species, unless they've gone over a long period of meeting, like in the Federation, where they've sort of sorted out some of those differences. So let's now talk about life cycles. Okay. First of all, how does your species even arrive in the universe? Are they hatched? Do they come from a cloning machine? Are they born like, humans? What's the gestation period? How does, reproduction even work? Is there a limited period of fertility? So, obviously we know in our culture, or as humans, humans aren't fertile, at least human females aren't generally fertile until they've had their first period for females. And for the males, well, whenever puberty hits, they can start, pumping out things to make babies, right? And we also know that women have a limited amount of reproduction, because when they run out of eggs and they're born with all their eggs at the beginning, that's it, no more. Then they have things called menopause, which my poor wife has to go through. And that has effects too. What does that do when they no longer are able to reproduce? What does their body do? And then there could be cultural things involved with, when is it appropriate to reproduce or not? For example, in the Jewish culture, in the Orthodoxy, they have a concept of tamet and tahor, where, and I'm embarrassed to say this, where essentially the Orthodox suggests that women are unclean and clean. And if you look at it, because the Jewish religion is extremely practical, if you ever look at it, it's essentially geared that the doctrine is there to determine essentially when a woman is more fertile and when they aren't, because when they aren't fertile, obviously having sex doesn't really matter, and we don't do things for pleasure in the Old Testament, right? We do it because we're supposed to. But again, that's a different argument, a different presentation. But again, these are things that are culturally important. How long does it even take to reach maturity? So species that live longer tend to mature later. For example, let's take elves in D&D, right? Elves live thousands of years or hundreds of years or whatever. When are they going to reach maturity? First, well, it takes them a couple hundred years sometimes, right, to get to the level of maturity. That's why I always get pissed off at people who play the Elarians. Okay, first of all, there are not supposed to be that many of them out there. Secondly, if you have that long of a lifespan, how are you physically mature at age 30? Sorry, it isn't happening. If you got a longer lifespan, you have to take longer to get to maturity, because it just takes more to get there. That's how biology works. So again, how long does the species live? That will determine a lot of different things. Puberty. When does that take place? What is that like? Are there multiple puberties? I'm going to direct you at this point to the Valiant. Is semi-play on, and this is my Andorian, Zoob. I'm going to share a screen on Zoob here. And you'll see how in depth I went. And this is in the days, again, I created this before Enterprise, and we won't go into my personal feelings on Enterprise, before TNG, so Andorians, I looked at this and I says, they come from a cold world. They have antenna. Why do they have antenna? How does this species exist, right? And I came up, and if you look at her general overview, if you go to the character sheet, it'll say Andorian abilities. Despite the fact that Zub may look slender and or fragile, she can easily lift twice her weight, because of course they're kind of ant-based. Similar to any Andorian, she has her antenna, which allow the greater hearing, the greater sensitivity than her humanoid ears would allow. The antenna also permit her to have long-distance heat-sensing abilities, detect the following electrical fields, changes in density, temperature, adrenaline, or tepatine, and permit her to have empathic and minor telepathic abilities. Whenever she does bond, the telepathic abilities with her spout will be complete. Now, notice that is only with her spout. She doesn't have general telepathic abilities, okay? One of the things I also mention about Andorians, and I go into this in the history, is that essentially they can't get pregnant until their second puberty. In other words, until they pair bond, they can't ever get pregnant. So what does that do? And Andorian culture, and this, I admit that I borrowed this from Leslie Fish, who created, if you look on the about Andorians, she has a whole thing on Andorians. You have to look in the old websites, but you'll find it eventually. But basically, that time between first puberty and second puberty, first puberty, they can't get pregnant. So what does that do? They're willing to have promiscuous relations with anything and anyone, and it doesn't matter. And so Andorians don't even care if they do things with their siblings. I mean, it's not frowned upon because it's experimentation, it's play. It's viewed as play. It's not viewed as, hey, anything serious, because they haven't pair bonded. They're not going to have kids. And when they do have kids, because it's such a hostile environment, they have litters of kids. And of course, several of them die. But that's just the nature, again, of evolution. So understand, if you're going to start creating like this, you have to think about that sort of, I'm sorry, I can't see. I don't know. Again, I apologize. I'm not great with, I just give up when it comes to PowerPoint and such. But eventually the slides will be available and everyone can see the pretty slides I made. So again, there's another effect, if you would, of living in a hostile environment where people are fighting. And that's why, again, Andorians are warlike, because they always had to fight over their own resources. They had to fight for every scrap of whatever little grass, and any vegetation is essentially extremely valuable. So again, this is why, in my mind, Andorians evolved the way that I had them evolve. Okay. And then you have to also think about what happens when they age. That we kind of touched on that with, the menopause. What are the common ailments from aging? What happens when they age? Do they wrinkle up and shrivel away? Are they respected? Are they viewed as a cast off of society? I don't know, but you got to think of these things. Let's talk about the species experiences. This is something that I don't think a lot of people think about when they create a new species. Okay, and it's one that I take a lot of pride in. And for example, when I was playing Zub the first time I wrote her, like 23 years ago or 24 years ago, whatever it was, she was mystified about human relations, and she was on a sim that in a group that no longer exists called the SLA, which is what some of you know about Seth Codis. That was his organization that he created or ran, but it's long defunct at this point. But in any case, this is a bulletin board era, and Zub had this didn't understand why the counselor and a different character who were really interested in one another couldn't seem to manage to just, tell each other, hey, yeah, we want to, we're interested in the other. And Zoobs was basically looking at them and says, well, why don't you just go and tell her? And why don't you just go and have, coitus? and both of them, when she told them separately, were aghast because she didn't understand the sociological things associated with that, because in Endorian society, it's completely different. Again, sex isn't a big deal. I mean, especially, a first puberty. So why would it be a big deal to them? And, it made for some hilarious posts because her experience is so different from the human experience, right? And so when you're writing these characters, that from this new species, you really have to think from that species perspective. For example, what challenges does that species face every single day? What's their communal knowledge? For example, what do they accept as normal? Like I gave you an example of what an Endorian might think of as normal, compared to as a human, right? Well, what else, do we think of as normal? I mean, I'll throw it out there. What do we humans think of as normal? What's our communal knowledge? Anyone? Bueller? I bet for those of us who are older, we have very different communal knowledge than those who are younger.
Sorry, wrong button. I accidentally disconnected. But one of those things of communal knowledge is how cities are designed. Less friendly to pedestrians, more friendly to cars. We have a society that is built around the automobile and its utility rather than our historic society built around carriages or pedestrians with backpacks.
Mm-hmm.
Having a car is a normal part of being an adult for a human.
Okay, let me give you something else. Okay, when I was born, I know I'm not the oldest in the room, but when I was born, in the 60s, barely, I grew up in a time of bell bottoms, velour, hush puppies. I grew up in a time where computers were not even accessible to the average human being. Okay. And we thought that we were going to need to know math to do everything, because when are you going to just have a calculator on hand? You won't. Let alone, God forbid, a cell phone. What was a cell phone? I mean, we didn't even know what that was. We had landlines. There was no cell phones. There was no computers. Even, in 1987, when I finally went to college, my first computer cost, and this was the mid-grade package, was a computer with a hard drive of 20 megabytes. Yes, you heard that right, 20 megabytes. A dot matrix printer, a CGA monitor, and a 2400 baud external modem. That's an antique now. In our day, communal knowledge would have been things like, don't go to Detroit, it's hostile, or third world countries are hostile, and we're the greatest nation in the world, and that, the USSR is something to be feared. And, these are all things that were communal knowledge. Today, my kids, to them, a cell phone is normal. That's everyday life. It can do everything for them. They're connected to it 100 times a day. I mean, if they lose their phone, they've lost their life. They don't know anything, and you know, to them, you know, what's normal is a stressful world where everything has to be done 20 minutes ago. You know, in my day, you know, you used a roadmap to find things. If someone told you go somewhere, and you know, I don't know how we did it, but we obviously did it. You know, we actually trusted human beings in saying, hey, if so and so comes up to you, because they're late, you know, let them know we went here, and we just trusted people to do that. You don't talk to people nowadays. Hell, I barely know my neighbors, you know, and I used to know all my neighbors when I was young. So there's a different communal value. We accept certain things as true, period. Okay? And that's our experience. So what is your species experience? What do they just accept as true? And that's important to know before you create another species, because you got to know how they think and what is acceptable and normal to them. Okay? And of course, these things that are acceptable and normal, as ridiculous as they may seem to us, are also going to shape their communication. It's going to shape their language formation, and it's going to shape their everyday method of thinking. Imagine being a water species and trying to explain to the water species the concept of breathing in the air. That should be poison to them. What would the water species word for anything outside of the water be? It's going to be poisonous of some sort, right? So what they may call water air, you know, to them, the outside of that is poison, or, you know, vacuum, or whatever. It's going to have a completely different meaning to them. Similarly, if you got a species that, you know, grows up in the trees, you know, what does, the stars mean? I don't know. Maybe they mean something more. Maybe they, maybe the dirt has no meaning to them, you know, or is deemed harmful because they might impact on it, you know, from falling. I don't know. But again, these things, again, the point is they're going to call it something, whether it's aether, not vacuum, but exactly, they're going to call it something that it's not good for them, right? So the point is that just because we call them things, it's not the way that other species are going to view it or call it. Okay. Now, of course, for writing purposes, we kind of have to cheat, and use similar language, because if we don't, no one's going to know what we're talking about, right? Another thing we should think about when we're playing these species is what significant, universal translators are definitely underrated. What things in their history impacted their ideology? For example, we as humans, what things impacted us so much? There is not a person alive, I don't know, that doesn't talk about World War II. Whether you agree with the current administration or not, that there have been analogies to Hitler. There have been analogies to all kinds of dictators, etc. That World War with Hitler was distinctly impactful on our society right now. Everyone knows about it. Everyone talks about it. If you were in the U.S., something that might have been very impactful was the Challenger blowing up. That I remember that still. Every minute of every second of what happened there, and that left a lasting impact. Okay, Columbia didn't leave as much of an impact on me as Challenger. Challenger was a big deal because of Christy McAuliffe and all the media attention. But again, Kennedy. For those who were there for Kennedy getting shot, that left an impact. Okay, the Berlin Wall coming down, that left an impact. Okay, so was there a near extinction event that would leave an impact? January, again, I wasn't going to get into that, but yes, January 6th definitely left an impact. We still are arguing about it, right? So again, these things, and I would argue that every species that has a first contact that is going to leave a huge impact on a society. What does that do, okay, to a species and their experience and how they view the universe, okay? All of those things, especially if it was a hostile first experience, oh my God, all of those things are going to affect how you create your species. Now, some of what I'm going to talk about here is going to be a bit of a crossover with my second in the series on writing memorable characters, because we're going to talk about things like what's the local environment like, okay? What's the home environment like? And these get more into the nitty gritty of the everyday of your species, because we know, even as people, for example, we come from different places. I come from the suburbs. Someone comes from a city, may have, like inner city Chicago, may have a very different experience than I do in a suburb, may have a very different sort of experience than someone comes from a rural environment, or someone that comes from the Aborigines. These sorts of things, again, are going to determine how your species, you need to know these things, how your species is. Is everyone in a uniform society where it's this utopia where, everyone lives in apartments and everyone has everything they need? I doubt it. Even in TNG and in Picard, we go back to the, his vineyards, right? So there's still very different environments that your people are going to live in. So you got to determine, where this person's from and what the local environment is like. What's the caste structure? Is a caste system? Is social structure? Is it a feudal system? Is it homogenous? Are there social prejudices? Oh my God. I mean, if you tell me that you don't have a social prejudice at all, I tell you, you're a liar. Okay. I know I have my own. I won't go into them. I don't want to offend anybody. But when I see or hear someone from those particular areas, I know I have an initial visceral adverse reaction, and then they have to prove themselves more, even though I know intellectually they shouldn't be any different. But there are cultural things that we are raised with as a person, or as individuals, that may affect the way we perceive others. And you could just look in today's society, where you have people across the different political values who are calling each other names and labeling them in certain ways, whether it's TDS, or whether it's MAGA, or whether it's fascist or whatever. These names are being thrown around, probably higher than I ever remember in my life. But again, that's going to color your species in terms of how they're going to, react to others within their own species, as well as others outside of it, because of their experience and their home environment. That's going to, cause things. For example, and again, I'll use human experience here as an example. In China, for a period of time, they were not allowed to have more than one child, and if they did, it was potentially jailable, or they could be, fined financially. So, is that something that happens in your species environment? Because maybe there was remember a TOS episode where the species literally was walking on top of each other and they had nowhere to move, and they were literally looking for space, and they used Kirk to get a disease to weed out some of their population, and they viewed it as a relief because they had no way to deal with their own population growth. So is it common to have siblings or not? Is it common to have nice parents or not? Do you even know your parents? If you were raised, by a machine in a cloning era, what would that mean? Would you even understand the concept of parents? Okay. And the answer is probably not. But again, some things to think about. Again, does wealth matter? Does status matter? All these things you need to think about. What about local customs, local religions? You know, what's their spirituality? What are holidays? Why were they created even? How are they celebrated? You know, we have a joke in the Jewish religion, you know, all of our holidays are, you know, we won, so let's eat, or we lost, so let's fast. So starve ourselves, you know? So, I mean, is it the same in that culture? You know, I don't know. Again, what are the expectations? What are the local rituals? What are things that, you know, this species would view as normal in terms of, you know, again, their everyday life? Do they need 4 people for a wedding? I don't know. Again, why? It's always the why, you know? Why do these species do the things they do? So here I'm going to take another example of things that I do. Because, you know, even I like shortcuts. You know, I don't always take the time to think about every little detail of a species, you know, because it's time consuming, right? I take sometimes a species and create something from it. For example, those of you who remember the Tigerians, they were in DS9 and in TNG. They only males were ever shown in anywhere in Star Trek. So naturally, I had to create a female one. But in creating a female one, I had to figure out what in the world does this species look like? Why did we never seen any females? And so if you go to Quebec, you can see Amalix. Amalix is special. She's probably one of my favorite characters. She talks a mile a minute. And I took what little canon I had from Star Trek, which was basically that the Tigerians' homeworld really isn't their homeworld. And then I ran with that. I actually based the Tigerian society off of, I went literally true Star Trek and based it off the 12 lost tribes of the Israeli culture. And I literally created the entire Tigerian structure based on that. And if you ever have the time, I'm very proud of the creation. You know, go and take a look at it in Quebec. It's located in I think that one's in Theta Fleet, Quebec. I run, and Amalix is just a delicious character. She's a lot of fun, and she'll proudly tell you that and talking a mile a minute, saying, "I'm the only." I'm the only Tigerian in Starfleet. I am the only female Tigerian. I'm the only one you'll probably ever see. And I'll talk like this, and don't mind me, but have you know anything about us? Oh, I'll be happy to tell you about us. Oh my goodness, you know? And she'll go on a lot faster than I am. And usually I could do a better impression, and I apologize that I'm doing Amalix a disservice because I'm not talking quickly enough. But, you know, again, a perfect example of taking a species and making it more, because we heard nothing and saw nothing in Star Trek. For those of you who were in the pregame and were, you know, while everyone was testing things and saw more of this, there's another character I created for the Sojourner in Sim Central. I'm not on the Sim anymore, but the character is still there, and I love the character. I just, you know, for whatever reason, didn't mesh with the Sim, though I love the people there and, you know, everything. But is Margarar. And she's an Antikin. We saw the Antikins in TNG. If you might remember, that was the they were the dog-like creatures, and they you know, they had a rivalry with another culture that was more snake-like, and the two of them were on the Enterprise, going back and forth and, you know, playing pranks on each other, trying to kill one another, etc. And this is just after the Borg were first met. And so I created Margarar, who, because she was dog-like enough, we remember that all these things were really kind of unmanageable, these characters. And so I figured if she's dog-like, well, let's train her. And I literally gave her an off-duty and an on-duty mode so that the Starfleet trained her that when she's on duty, she has to act in a certain way, and when she's off duty, she could be herself. And because she was shorter and lived in a hostile world, she had a very short lifespan. And that was another thing that came to being with her, was that she's at the point where she's about to not be able to have kids, but yet she feels a duty to her culture and race to be on with Starfleet to try and bridge that gap between them. And so she's wondering if she'll ever have kids. That brings me to the final topic, which is the one I harp on all the time, and it's the mixed breed problem. And I'm sure that if you've ever heard me speak, you know how much I hate them, because they're unrealistic, period. I don't care what you tell me, they're unrealistic. There's a reason that humans cannot breed with apes. We become so distant in time and space that even though we're similar, we can't reproduce with them. Okay? There are mixed breeds that we have on this earth. What is the lesson when you mix a horse with a donkey? You get a mule. And when you get a mule, what happens with a mule? They're sterile. They can't reproduce. So mules are always artificial. Okay? And why do people create the mixed breeds? Why? Because they want to gain advantage. They want to use all those abilities. They want to essentially try and be a Mary Sue. Now, mixed breeds should be extremely rare. Why? Even in Star Trek canon, Vulcans and humans can reproduce. Green blood and red blood. I don't understand it, but they did it. However, they need medical assistance in order to do it. Okay? And what does that mean when you have that mixed breed? Can they just breed with another mixed breed, or can they breed with a human, or do they still need medical assistance? Are they even able to have kids in the future? I don't know, but I think, mixed breeds. All right. And then you have to have even more clarification in your background, in my opinion. Are you raised more human-like, more Vulcan-like? What are your parents' interaction like? I mean, it's like on Earth, if someone from an Asian culture marries someone from a European culture, they're very different. Or even an American culture, they're very different. And so how do you mesh those things? How did they make compromises in this character and the way they live? And there's got to be some sort of conflict, somewhere. Okay. And what is that culture that the character observes from everyone? And then, how is that character viewed? Now, maybe in the Star Trek world, because we're all, utopian type of society, right? We accept everybody. But what if they went back to, their home world? Are they accepted? Look at half-elves in Dragonlance. I mean, I love Dragonlance. It's one of my favorite series. Half-elves are scoffed at. They aren't acceptable in human society. They aren't acceptable in elven society. Nobody likes the half-elves. So, for me, again, I just, it gets, some of these mixed breeds get really, really ridiculous, when you start doing the Cation and, human. Really? They're not even anything genetically similar. They're not, but again, yes.
Don't hate me, but I have to cut you off because we have to let your actual presentation recording process before we can record the next one.
Oh, well, fine. Be that way. See if I care.
I'm so sorry, but what I am going to say is, folks, Stuart is amazing and has awesome things to say. So I'm going to give him like a hot second to wrap up. But then there's a voice overflow you're welcome to hop into to continue the great chat, because I know Stuart has all the amazing things to say. So.
I love you, Beth. You're all too kind. But again, so if you're going to do the mixed breed thing, like I said, have some real reasons for it. This should be extremely rare. This should not be something that's common, because if you're coming from different worlds, the chances of genetic compatibility is small, and you're going to need a lot of intervention. And then the question is, what are those things able to do later on? In any case, as my hot minute is up, I'm going to let the next speaker, if anyone wants to talk to me further, I'll go into the overflow for a bit. And then I'm going to go shopping for my paralegal who needs a present for dealing with her grandmother's death. So, in any case, thank you all for listening. Thank you for bearing with me. And I'll see you in the overflow, maybe.